Hello, and welcome to Passing Period. I'm your host, Mr. Meyerowitz, and today I'll discuss another question from one of my students that pertains to an important issue from one of America's favorite past or future classes. But first, I've received several questions related to the evolution of 20th and 21st century China from the collapse of the Qing to the emergence of a Chinese superpower. No 10-minute passing period can contain China's metamorphosis over the past 125 years, so I am planning to upload a feature-length presentation for tomorrow about modern China that I recorded for my students this year. That should also give some of my passers who have not taken Kopoko an opportunity to be my students for a full class period. I'm not sure that I'll ever change the name of my program to Classing Period, but I hope you enjoyed the 50-minute transformation of the Chinese chrysalis into a Belt and Road butterfly. Today's question comes from Carolina. She writes, quote, "This isn't really a question, but who are your favorite philosophers?" Oh, thanks, Carolina. And that most certainly is a question marked by its interrogative pronoun who and question mark at the end. Since some of my viewers may be taking existentialism with me in the future, this is a perfect opportunity to introduce some proto existentialists and how their ideas shape the values and principles of 20th century existentialism. Philosophy, literally the love of language, branched into various domains even in ancient times, including philosophies about politics, poetics, faith, the universe, selfhood, and even knowledge itself. Holding these ideas together, however loosely, it was a general idea that reason and logic could guide the mind to universal understandings, though classical and enlightened philosophers relied on judgments and biases that reflected their own Western heritage more than once that illuminated a truly universal or godlike worldview. From their philosophies, Western elites came to understand that reason could be applied to scripture, to state policy, to aesthetics, to education, to our natural order, and to everything else. And philosophers prided themselves on developing unifying theories of everything from faith to physics and from natural rights to natural selection. The problem with these vast structures that seemingly contained all universal knowledge, ethics, and formulas was that they threatened to become a new dogma that precluded any opposing model or mode of interpretation. The church curriculum had yielded to a liberal arts and sciences curriculum, and any attempt to challenge this newer and truer one was an act of heresy. Enter the early 19th century Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who claimed that the modern church did not preach true, authentic, life affirming faith, but was simply a bourgeois mouthpiece that echoed socially acceptable ethics. In Fear and Trembling, which he wrote under the pen name Johannes de Silentia, or Silent John, Kierkegaard turns to the first believer in the monotheistic God, Abraham, whom God tested in the Old Testament by ordering him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. For Kierkegaard, Abraham was and remains a radical believer rather than a conformist, and by committing himself to this spiritual mission, rejected social custom. Instead of following the mores and standards established by a seemingly universal, that is, rational and consensual ethical codes, Abraham embraced faith, which Johannes or Kierkegaard argues is, quote, a teleological suspension of the ethical, end quote. That is, Abraham's telos or purpose supersedes and replaces universal fatherly codes of loving and protecting one's son. While Abraham appears to be a murderer to those who witness his attempted filicide, he is for Kierkegaard a knight of faith, whose mission is more personal, more real, and more true than any set of values society has prescribed. Unlike the enlightened philosophers who preceded Kierkegaard, such as Kant or Hegel, who argued that humankind is guided by universal principles of ethics and reason. Kierkegaard sees the Knight of Faith as justified in his departure from universal ethics, even in the face of social pressure and ostracism. For Kierkegaard, faith is intensely personal, allows for a bond between the individual and God that can neither be comprehended nor explained, and that exposes reason and ethics as impersonal and self-denying. Of course, Kierkegaard does not dismiss ethics altogether, but he recognizes that faith and ethics can be rivals, and that conformity to universal ethics may conflict with one's spiritual quest as a knight of faith. In this story, Abraham loves Isaac as any father would love his son, but his faith defines him more than his fatherhood, and his actions defy logical explanation. Abraham would appear even more criminally insane if he attempted to communicate his motives to others who did not share his faith or mission. Yet Kierkegaard also reveals that Abraham's homicidal mission is not one he undertakes lightly. Faith is an arduous process, full of fear and trembling and uncertainty, suppression of universal ethics, but ultimately commitment to actions that defy social structures. But faith is also an affirmation of the individual in relation to the divine, and a leap into the absurd, a higher reality that does not submit to the artificial systems that human authorities have developed to enforce social cohesion and to institutionalize ethical codes. 2 generations later, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed similar patterns that Kierkegaard or Johannes de Silentio had criticized, specifically that individuals were living according to codes that they did not control and that had no personal meaning to them. For Kierkegaard, knights of faith like Abraham were admirable because their actions did not bring them personal reward. Instead, their continuous and arduous acts of faith only alienated them from society and produced unfathomable uncertainty. For Nietzsche, people have passively consumed the ethics and values that institutions and authorities have cultivated for eons, converting them from individuals who can produce their own meaning to dull-eyed sows or sheep who blindly accept and obey. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, he discusses the ideal of the Übermensch, or overman, who has the capacity to overcome all obstacles through his own agency and commitment to self, but who has been lost in modern life because of social and economic pressures that mandate conformity and that erode authenticity. Nietzsche's famous statement in The Gay Science, quote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him," does not celebrate the loss of religion in modern Europe as much as the diagnosis of modern malaise. We are no longer committed to anything, no longer believe in anything, and have surrendered to the herd mentality that has been cultivated through our history and our heritage. We've become handicapped by the ethical and aesthetic values that these institutions have invented to elevate and legitimize themselves over the individual, and have therefore lost our creative capacity, our ingenuity, and our curiosity. For Nietzsche, the Übermensch is a future-looking man who recognizes his own ability to create himself in the form that he chooses rather than strive to copy ethical and aesthetic models in modern scriptures and advertisements. Far from preaching nihilism, Nietzsche urges the individual to be generative, productive, and authentic, to say yes to life, and to experience the world on his own terms and in pursuit of his own goals. He calls this amor fati, or the love of fate, the permission to love life freely and to challenge the structures and codes that have blinded the masses and hoovered their spirits from their bodies. Unlike Kierkegaard, Nietzsche rejects Christian faith and encourages the individual to have faith in his unfettered self, an internal affirmation that stands in contrast to Abraham's desire for external direction and validation from God. For Nietzsche, religious doctrine, state power, and commercial culture all foster submission and conformity. Nietzsche's contentions resonate with critiques against the totalitarian systems that defined the 1930s. To borrow from Orwell's bleak vision of the future in 1984, a people that capitulates to theological, political, and commercial controls are begging for the boot stamping on their faces forever. Nietzsche recognized that the universal ethics that we've accepted on the basis of reason are means to an end for moral authorities to inhibit free spirits. The Übermensch must assert his own will to power, his own agency and authenticity, and follow his own instinct and curiosity, and abandon the life-denying authorities who profit from the weakness, immobility, and silence of the herd. Christian and secular existentialists of the mid-20th century viewed Kierkegaard and Nietzsche as canaries in an ever darker, ever deeper coal mine. By the time totalitarian powers had come and gone, humanity seemed more lost than ever. For not only was God dead, but so were all established and respected institutions of church and state. The myth that one tribe was superior to another, that the colonized must submit to colonizers, women yield to men, workers obey their masters, had been gravely challenged by the Second World War, and existentialists believed that individuals who were ready to rebuild their communities and live their lives according to their own values. Of course, not everyone could be an Abraham or an Übermensch, though some certainly tried, and we can see radical departures from Western norms and the undermining of established cultural institutions and the fabric of Gandhi's famous white cotton dhoti and shawl, the assertion of personal worth in Rosa Parks' demonstration on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and the recreation of the sounds of Vietnam blasting through the Star-Spangled Banner on Jimi Hendrix's guitar at Woodstock. Each of these individuals opposed unjust laws, challenged prevailing norms, and made a defiant show of self. For Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and the existentialists that followed, acts of self can be acts of disobedience. The self can only be realized when it rises above or departs from the herd that has been raised and fed to empower institutions that control our universe. Thank you for your question, Carolina. See you on our next passing period. Toodaloo!